All right, so that's officially recording then. I'll just go ahead and get started. I want to be mindful of all of your time. For those of you who have not met me, I am Alicia Sternad-Holcraft. I am in charge of our design center and our layout center. So all of our page designers, I am part of their team, help them with all the things. We work on that together. And so as part of that, what I want to talk to you about today is efforts that you all can make, very simply, things that are not going to take up a lot of your time. This meeting today will be the biggest time ask that I'm making of you that will help us with how we design our print editions. I'm calling this PEO, Print Edition Optimization, which is not a real term, but it made me laugh when I thought of it. So I'm rolling with it. And that will give you an idea of my humor, so you know what you're in for the next half hour. For the purposes of this, when I say print or the print edition, I do also mean our e-paper that we create for websites every day, because right now our designers are creating that the same as they do with actual print editions. We're not making adjustments to the e-paper right now to change anything for that format. So just to be clear on what I mean by that. So I want to make it really clear that I understand that a lot is already being asked of all of you, that when it comes to digital, you all have probably had to go to, a dozen trainings and learn a dozen things. All of those things still apply. Digital is still incredibly important to our company and still do everything that you've been asked to do for digital. What we're going to talk about today is a bit of the differences between digital and print editions, how you can improve things for the print editions. And the great news is that a lot of these things are very similar, and changing things for one of them is also going to improve the readability of the other format as well. So this will not be wasted work when it comes to one format or the other. It's going to help you across the board. So the biggest differences when we're talking about print is, of course, the audience is much, much different. Online, the entire world is your audience. When you're writing your headlines, you need to keep in mind search engines, all those kinds of things. But in print, the audience is our subscribers. These are generally people in our community, people who care about our local news and our local community. They know some background on the things that you're writing about. They know the people that you're writing about. So that's a significant difference. Space restrictions, of course, are different for print, especially when it comes to headlines. Headlines for print are generally shorter, and I know that you all have been told that in a lot of cases longer is better for digital, and there's some changes here. But in print, we do get to remember that we have subheads, so we can still get all the information in headlines. We just have to work it a little bit differently. And then the other thing is what is called points of entry. I don't know if this is something that people are taught nowadays. This is kind of an older term, and we'll go over it in detail later. But online, to hook a reader, all you have is generally the headline, a short teaser, and then a photo. Whereas in print, there's a lot more things that you have, a lot more chances to hook a reader: the headline, the subheadline, photos, graphics, bold quotes, in-copy subheads, charts, labels, all kinds of things. So that actually presents, I really think, a bonus for print over digital. It makes it easier. So in terms of audience, again, like I said, the audience for the web is the whole world, and it's Google. Local is, your local people. So for digital, you've been instructed that in your headlines, you need to write out, for example, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, or, the mayor of your local community. But in your print headline, when you rewrite a headline for print, you can just say Noem, or you can just say the last name of your mayor. A lot of these things can be shortened because the readers know who and what you're talking about. For example, if you're doing a sports story about a consolidated school district, digitally you've been asked to write out Dilworth, Glendon, Felton, so that someone who's Googling Dilworth Wrestling will come up with our story. But in print, you can put DGF, because largely the print readers will know which school that is. And if they don't know which school that is, there's most likely little chance that they actually cared what was happening in Dilworth Wrestling anyways. So it's okay to use those acronyms. Same thing with some of the labels that you're being asked to clarify things in digital. So in digital, you might say small Minnesota town or small Minnesota town of Black Duck, and that's going to help a lot online. But if you are writing a story For the Black Duck American, if you say small Minnesota town of Black Duck in the headline, that's probably going to come across as a little condescending to the readers of that town's paper. Space restrictions are the next big thing. This is a lot of what we're working with right now. As you probably know, many of our properties have started using what we're calling skeletons, which is just a sort of a framework to a page that helps make sure that editors and designers are on the same page as we start things. And a great thing about skeletons is that they tell everyone exactly how many characters can fit in a headline. So I urge you, if you have not already, to check out your publication skeletons. If your publication does not have skeletons, look at skeletons for other publications. Those are all online on our IMOP website. The IMOP website you can find in the email signature of any hub manager. So if you have the email that I sent out about this training, if that was forwarded to you, you can just go to that website. There's a ton of stuff there, and one of those things is skeletons. So if you know, for example, that you are writing a story that's going to be the centerpiece, the big story on the front, you can look and say, oh, okay, the big headline can only be about 15 characters, so I need to come up with something short for that, and then I can come up with a longer subhead. If you know that your story is going down the side, you go, okay, I have a total of 28 characters, but it's 4 lines of 7, so I have to use short words, things like that. The skeletons are a great guide. When I send out the video recording for this, I'll also make sure that I include a link to where you can find those skeletons as well. And then points of entry is huge. Points of entry is essentially any design element that a person who is flipping through one of our newspapers will stop and look at. They have done just hundreds of different eye tracking studies of how people take in news, whether they're reading it in print or whether they're reading it online. It's all been studied. And all of the studies tell us that these points of entry are what makes somebody read or stay on a story. If the headline is catchy, they'll start, but the headline has one chance to grab a reader. If you have a headline and a subhead, that's another chance you've added. A photo, another chance you've added. A pulled quote, another chance you've added. A logo, anything. All of these are additional chances to get the reader interested in the story. So this story, for example, has 16 points of entry, and eye tracking studies show us that when a person has 16 points of entry in a story, it's very unlikely that they're not going to read at least a little bit of a story. Points of entry are just really important because you all put so much work into the stories that you write, and so anything we can do to make sure that people are actually reading them, that people take the time to read all of them, that they grab the readers, is phenomenal. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to go through a story, pretend that you're in the middle of writing this story, and we're going to come up with ways that we can improve it for print, keeping these things in mind. So I just grabbed a story about the ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. So as you can see, we have a headline here, which is accurate, but not specific. It doesn't really tell us much about what's actually going on, where it's going on, what's really happening. It's not giving the readers the information that they need to be interested in this story. So we can make it a little bit more specific, but this is still a rather boring headline, and it's not necessarily going to grab many people. And a big part of that is that the main verb in this headline is continues. Continues is kind of a killer verb, which we will get into later. And I don't mean killer in the like cool killer way that that kids probably don't say that anymore. So the headline is the marketing of your story. This is you trying to sell your story, telling people, hey, this is what's here. Check it out. You definitely want to read this. And the verb is your strongest sales tool. So use the absolute strongest verb that you can find. Action verbs are the best. So the strongest action verb that's accurate and not sensationalistic to your story. There are, of course, cases when you're going to want to use passive voice. For example, if you have two papers and one headline says unknown assailant murders man and one says man murdered, I'm definitely going to be reading that one instead. So sometimes passive voice is better, but if you're going to do that, skip the helping verbs. You don't need to say man was murdered, just man murdered. That's how we do it for headlines. ING forms, again, all those eye tracking studies show us that readers do not respond to ing forms of verbs as strongly as they do other forms of verbs. So avoid the ing forms as often as you can. They're just not as strong, as gripping for people. Headline speak, avoid it if you can. If it's words that we wouldn't say in real life, inks, moles, nabs, just don't use it in a headline if you can avoid it. Obviously, there are times when we just need to, due to space restrictions. Those rail headlines on the front, like I showed you, where you only have 7 characters per line. Sometimes you just need to use one of these, and that's okay, but do so sparingly because they come across as jargon to the readers. And again, studies show that they're just not as interested in reading a story with one of those kinds of headlines. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Newsies. If you haven't, you absolutely should, because Christian Bale is a way better dancer than you would think watching him in Batman. But in that movie, there's a scene where Joseph Pulitzer is reading the headline of his own newspaper. The headline is "Trolley Strike Drags On for Third Week." And then Pulitzer goes, "And this so-called headline drags on for infinity." And then he goes on a rant about how he wants his headline writer fired and they need to hire the headline writer from the other paper because this headline's crap and nobody's going to read his paper and all these kinds of things. So that's something that I always keep in mind, that those kinds of words, drags on, continues, updates, these ones that I've got here on the screen, they signal to the reader there's no news in this story. I'm just going to reiterate what was already happening yesterday. Don't bother reading this. You can just keep going. So avoid these kind of words that say nothing's happening. That's really going to help with grabbing readers in print and online. So for a headline, when you are writing a story, of course, there's always going to be a lot of options for what your headline could be. And the thing to really keep in mind is, again, that this is the marketing for the story. This sells the story. So which of the possible headlines promises what the story you're writing is going to deliver? And again, this is one of the reasons that we are asking you as reporters to be a big part of this process, because nobody knows the article that you're writing better than you. It's yours. So having you write the headline helps us make sure that the promise and what we deliver are accurate together. So for this one, for example, is the story the hundreds of ships that are waiting? Is it the shipping experts talking about tides? Is it the timeline for when this could be moving? Any of those things. So pick the one that actually is most accurate to what we're going to find when we read your story. So for this one, we picked hundreds of ships on standby and then added a subhead here with some additional things. Experts say the shutdown of the canal is costing the world $400 million per minute. And of course, that kind of number is going to grab people. Numbers and headlines, especially when it's a big number, staggering like that, $400 million a minute. I mean, most of us couldn't dream of that kind of money in 10 lifetimes. So to think of the fact that this is costing that much in a minute, that grabs people. So subheadlines can be additional specifics you had to cut for the print version. They can be a really compelling detail of the story that pulls people in. You know, in crime stories, when you write a crime story, the headline sometimes has to be pretty dry, especially because you have to include, you know, your attribution of court documents say, police say, man alleged to, you know, whatever. So you can add a detail here in the subhead field, and that helps a lot. Pulled quote is another thing that's really helpful. All these eye tracking studies show us that people really connect with pulled quotes because it's something another human being is saying. And that really is a very, very useful tool. And again, this is something that you all can add very easily by just copying and pasting into the notes field the quote, who said it, and what their title is. And all of you, I think, know when you're writing stories, you know what your good quotes are, what your best quotes are. I mean, a lot of times, even when you're doing an interview and somebody says something, you're like, oh, that's the quote. I'm sure you've all experienced that at some point. So you know what that great quote is. Put that quote in the notes box so the designer has that access to that great quote right away and can add it as a pulled quote to your story. And do remember that if the story is on a divisive issue, pick a quote from each side so that everybody's accurately represented. And this, again, is something that you, as the person most connected to this story, help out a lot with, because if a designer later on in the process needs to add a pulled quote, it's possible that they're just going to pull a quote from your story and add it, and it might not be what you know to be the best quote. And it's always possible that they won't realize the divisive nature of the story and will only put one quote instead of both, which can lead to us looking unbalanced. And your name's the one on the story. So of course we don't want that to ever happen. for journalism reasons, but also because that's your name and we don't want you to appear unbalanced. And then art. We always want to add art whenever possible. Any kind of art, photos, mugshots, graphics, locators, all kinds of things. These are great and they really, really grip readers. A photo is worth 1,000 words, so you're adding 1,000 words to your story every time you add an image. The great thing about Q is that it archives all the photos that have been uploaded in it, so you can actually do a search in Q. So if, for instance, you were doing a story about Minnesota government, you can search Tim Walz, and Tim Walz will come up in there, and you can, there's a duplicate function in Q, so you can duplicate that photo, and edit the cut line, edit the date, to make it match what your story is and attach it to your story. It will take literally seconds. You don't have to actually search for a new photo, but you can link something. So if you're talking about a local person, you can search for a file photo of your mayor, of this city park, of this intersection where the construction is happening, whatever it is, that's all available to you. Do you need a graphic? You're in luck because the Design Hub does provide those. I don't know how many of you are aware of this. On the website, which I directed you to earlier, and again, I'll send a link out when I send the video for this training out, we have a graphics request form. And that form has all the information you need to request a graphic from us. We can do any kind of graphic. We can do charts, maps, locators, all kinds of things. We also can do photo illustrations from really complex to really simple. Just remember that the more complex the graphic request is, that the longer it's going to take us to do. So keep that in mind and give us the time to do that. And then make sure that you also communicate with your editor about that, so that if they had a different idea in mind, if they'd already requested something through FNS or Troy Becker, they might have other reasons that they don't want you to request the graphic, or that they wanted a specific size because they already know where it's going to run in your paper. So just make sure you're communicating with them on that. Celeste asks, should you always duplicate the photo instead of just using the same one and changing the cut line? Yes, you absolutely need to duplicate it and change the cut line. If you use the same one, it is going to change the cut line anywhere else on the website that photo appears. So if you, if you're in Duluth and you want to use a photo of Tim Walz, and so you grab one of the Duluth ones and you change that cut line, it would change the cut line from that story from when he actually visited Duluth. So make sure you're using duplicate before you change any cut lines. Yes, great question, Celeste. Thank you. Another great thing to add, and this is something, again, that eye tracking studies show that people read, and they generally read the entire thing, is a breakout box. And a lot of our stories just naturally lend themselves to breakout boxes. If you're writing about an event, you include information on where the event is, when it is, how much tickets are, those kinds of things. If you're writing about a new business, you include their contact info, address, hours, website, whatever it is. Some context for the story, a timeline, key things to know, numbers, some interesting information that maybe didn't quite fit into the story, need to know information, key takeaways, especially, if you're doing a really complex topic, to be able to break it down to like a few bullet points of like, these are the important things that happened in this event, or the important things to remember. Those are all great and they really help the readers. And again, this is just another thing that, because studies tell us that people really look at breakout boxes, the more interesting we can make them, the more likely the reader is to go, oh, okay, now I'm going to read that story. So for the example I put up here, I have that the Ever Given, how big is it? And so it's like, if it was vertical, it'd be the world's 37th tallest building. It's as big as 271 and a half Danny DeVitos stacked on top of each other. Some people might find that interesting, and then they would grab that. Joe Bowen asked, how do you denote a print subhead in Q, and how should we format a pull quote in the notes section? So right now there's not a print subhead field in Q. So what I suggest you do is talk to whoever edits your stories and ask what their preference is, because when they move your story into Google, then there is a subhead field that they should be copying and pasting that into. So ask them if it's easier for them if you put them both in the print headline field, like with some slashes to separate them, or if you put the subhead in the notes field. Ask them what they prefer, what's easiest for them when they are moving the story to Google, and do whatever they ask you to do. In the notes field, I would just write pulled quote, colon, copy the quote, and then put the name of the person who said it and whatever their title is. So if it's, so-and-so mayor of Grand Forks, then just do that. In copy subheads, these are another thing that eye tracking studies show us that people always look at. They're great as a storytelling tool. They just mark a transition in the text. I like to think of them as when you're watching Law and Order and it changes to a new scene and it goes dun dun. So this is still Law and Order, but this is a new part. Something's changing. This is a break in the story, and it helps as a transition. They're just fabulous to use for that, and they really help direct readers. One important thing to mention about these is that when it comes to eye tracking studies and in copy subheads, what they show us about the digital world is that they break things up into chunks that readers find more acceptable. And so stories with in copy subheads tend to get about 30% more read time than stories that don't have them. So not only is this important for giving readers another chance to say, yep, I'm going to read that story when they're reading it in print, but it can also increase your engagement minutes in digital, get people to read more of your story, which is important because the stories you do is important, and also important for our bottom line and our engagement statistics and ad dollars and all of those other background things that thankfully I am not in charge of. So as you can see, going through this, we have changed this story from one with just 2 points of entry to one with 11 points of entry. And that means 11 chances to grab the reader's attention. Every story should have at least 3 points of entry, but I really want you to push yourselves and strive to go for at least 5 in every story that you do. Because by doubling the number of points of entry that you have, you're doubling the chances that a reader is going to read what you have spent so much time on. And, obviously, you guys are doing great work, and the more eyeballs we can get on it, the better. I want as many people as possible to be reading all the things that you do. Now, I get that this seems like a lot. It just took us about 20 minutes to go over all of it. So I want to be really clear that what we are asking of you is not that you spend an extra half an hour on every story that you write, thinking of all these things, working on these things. What we're asking is that you spend about 90 seconds additional on each story that you write. Just think about, does this have a photo? Could I do a photo? Okay, let me just quick search in Q and see if there's something I can add here. Let me just think about what I've written for my digital headline, copy and paste that into the print field, and just adjust it a little bit based on what I know about print audience and space limitations and things. To go, as you're writing, go, oh, this quote's great. I'm going to copy it into the notes box. Just to take a few moments to do these things, not to completely overhaul the way that you write things, but just to take a little bit of time to do this. What we figured out in looking at how much time we're spending on all parts of our process is that if reporters spend about 90 seconds on each story that they write to add in some of these elements and be mindful of these things, on the back end when it comes to editors, back and forth between editors and designers about headlines that don't fit, I need a photo, is there a great quote here, all of those things. Further down the process, those 90 seconds save about half an hour of staff time for other people. And that's efficiencies that we can really absolutely use. And, the end goal of Skeletons and of this is that when things take editors and designers less time, that we can push back some of the content deadlines so you all have more time to work on your stories, because I always want to give you as much time as possible to work on things. So these are some fields in Q that are going to help you. Celeste said, I would love tips on searching in Q. I find it not very user-friendly. Or maybe it's just me. I actually am not allowed access to Q because I deal only on the print side. So I can't help you with that, but I'll definitely pass that on, that some search tips in Q would be helpful. And maybe, like Lori Menke can send those out or something. I'll pass that on. So there is a print headline field in Q. So you can just copy and paste what you've written for the digital headline and just edit it to fit some of the things that we've talked about. And there's this notes field. So you can copy and paste quotes. If you have multiple ideas for a headline, you can put those all in there. If you have a message for your editor, say you think the story could really use a photo, but a quick search didn't reveal one, so you'd like your editor to look more, you can ask your editor to do that. If there's a message that you have for the designer, you can put that there as well. The notes field, when a designer puts a story on the page, the notes field actually pops out into a separate box for the designer that the designer then has to manually close. So designers have been told very clearly that they never have any excuses to not have read everything in the notes field. So anything you put in the notes field, the designer should always see, and they'll always have that information. So it's a great place to put stuff. Other things, in copy subheads go into the body of a story. Sidebars, breakout text can go at the bottom of the story. And then make sure that you put in the notes field, there's a sidebar at the bottom, breakout box at the bottom, whatever it is, so that the designer has that notification up there that something important is down at the bottom so that they can pay attention to that as well. Jillian says, I found that sometimes searching for keywords in quotes helps a lot in Q. So if that helps you all, I hope it does. The big thing is I do want to say that, the key to success, digital and print, is still that you all are producing the great content that you already produce. I'm not trying to tell you how to do your content. You all know your jobs and you do fabulous work. I read the work that you all do. It's great. This is just to help get the reader's attention. Because when you've written a great story, the more we can do to make sure that people are reading it, that more people are reading it, the better. That honors the time that you've put into it. It increases the value of our publications, of our news in the eyes of our readers. It helps us out. It helps you out. And again, it just makes the work that you're doing even more worthwhile, the more people that we can get to read it. So that's the key of all of this. So again, I'll send this out so you guys can have this. So just a couple of things to think about when you are writing your headline. So write your headline and then think, okay, is the audience now correct for print? Is the length of this seem reasonable for print? Is this the strongest verb I can use? Is this headline clear? Is it accurate? Is the facts in it all true? And is it promising what this article is going to deliver? Those are the things to do. Joe Bowen added the tip that switching the search between most relevant and most recent can also be helpful when you're searching in Q. So thanks, Joe. And then the other points of entry. So copy and paste a quote into the notes field, add photos, request a graphic if one should fit for your story, add some in copy subheads, look if there's any information that should be popped into a breakout, event information, website information, anything like that. Rebecca asked, it seems like the additional points of entry take up more space. How can we know when these will be used in the print edition? They seem like great elements, but just wondering. The thing is that sometimes they won't. Sometimes they won't make it, and that's okay. The more options we have for them, the better. And designers and editors will prioritize them. So if you've attached 2 file photos and you have a pulled quote and there's only room for 1 additional element, then they're going to look at, is one of these photos a really strong photo, or is this quote a really phenomenal quote? And then whatever the strongest point of entry is what will be put in if decisions have to be made. And that's it. That's what I have to say. Again, the goal of this is not to make all of you take up a ton of extra time working on things, to have to slave over your stories and do even more than you're already being asked. It's just to take a few seconds when you're writing to think about things you can do that's going to improve the way that these engage our readers and how they get the reader's attention, so that we can improve things across all of our platforms. So what questions do you have that I have not answered yet? Let me know.
Alicia, what would you like to see most improved?
I guess this is through no one's fault, because I know you all have had a lot of training lately on SEO, especially when it comes to headlines. But designers are seeing a lot of headlines that are much too large for print. They're too long. They're too detailed, or they keep including the South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, and they have to be adjusted. That's a big thing for designers, and that is a huge time suck for editors and designers, because when that happens, what we then need to do is the designer has to go back to the editor in Slack and say, okay, this headline is 19 characters too long, so let's adjust it. And then your editor who's probably read, 20 stories that day has to go back and open that story up to remember which story it was and then say, okay, will this one work? And then the designer has to go back and see if it works. And then they're like, well, no, now it's too short by 4 characters. So it's going to look like this. And then the editor, it's some back and forth, and it takes a lot of time on the back end. So that would save the most time. So just in terms of efficiencies and what we want to achieve in terms of being able to make deadlines better for all of you, that's huge. Any other questions? April says, where can we access the skeleton designs? Those are all on the IMOP website. Which again, if you have the email that you were sent about this training today, if you go down at the bottom in my email signature, the IMOP website is in there. So you can go in there and then go under Design Center to skeletons, and that's there. And Joe asked, how do we ask for a graphic? That's on that same website. If you go under Design Center, there's tools for editors, and the graphics request form is right there. So you can request all of those right through there. Denton asks, you can search Q using any of the fields in the search pop-up window. Document type, document stat, author, section. I use them a lot. Joe asks about the usual turnaround for a graphic. It really depends on the kind of graphic, the complexity of it, and what day it is. Tuesdays and Fridays being the days that we put together the majority of our print editions, it's harder for us to get in a graphic at that time. If you put in a graphic on a Wednesday morning, we're probably going to be able to turn that around a lot quicker because we don't have as much work on a Wednesday morning. So there's not a perfect answer to this question. So what we ask is just as soon as you know that you're going to need a graphic and you have the information for it, to let us know so we can plan accordingly. On the graphic request form, you can put the deadline for when you need the graphic by. And if for some reason that's not something we'll be able to accommodate, then we'll let you know. And so, depending on what the story is, you can either talk to your editor about, I really think this needs a graphic. Can we hold it for a day so that we can get the graphic, or we can make the graphics a simpler version of what you asked for, or talk through what our options are there. All right, what else? If any of you think of questions later or as you're actually doing this, you feel like you need some guidance or help or anything that I can do for you, please let me know. You all have my email. My phone number is in my email signature. My cell phone number is down there. I don't sleep, call, text any time of the day. Pretty much I'm usually available. I don't have a life. So whatever you need, if there's something I can do to help you, please let me know, because I really do believe that this is going to bring incredible value for our readers, for all of our platforms. So I want to do anything I can to help you all make this successful. So if there's no other questions, I will let you all get back to your day. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Again, it was just wonderful to see all the faces of all of you that I don't usually get to meet and see. I read all of your work, but I don't know that you exist. So it's great to see you. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.